Lecture 5, Grammar, Usage, and Language Guidelines. Introduction. Welcome to Lecture 5 of our comprehensive APA-style series, Grammar, Usage, and Language Guidelines. In our previous lectures, we've mastered technical formatting, organizational structure, and writing style principles. This lecture focuses on the grammatical precision and inclusive language practices that ensure your writing meets the highest standards of professional scholarly communication. This lecture covers the specific grammar and usage guidelines that distinguish professional academic writing from casual communication. We'll explore strategic verb tense usage, modern approaches to inclusive language, pronoun guidelines that respect diverse identities, and the mechanical precision that supports clear, respectful, and effective scholarly discourse. These language skills are essential for participating in contemporary academic conversations with sensitivity, precision, and professional competence. By the end of this session, you'll have complete mastery of the grammar and language guidelines that ensure your writing communicates effectively while demonstrating respect for diverse communities and scholarly standards. Verb tense by paper section, strategic usage. Strategic verb tense usage in academic writing follows logical patterns that reflect the temporal relationships between different types of content and the scholarly conversation your paper joins. Understanding these patterns ensures your writing demonstrates professional competence while communicating temporal relationships clearly and accurately. The introduction section of your paper typically uses present tense when discussing current knowledge, ongoing debates, and established facts in your field. Present tense signals to readers that you're describing the current state of knowledge and positioning your work within ongoing scholarly conversations. For example, research demonstrates that social media affects academic performance, uses present tense, because this represents current understanding in the field. However, when discussing specific studies in your introduction, use past tense to describe what researchers did and found. Smith et al. 2022 conducted a longitudinal study and found significant correlations between social media use and decreased academic performance. The past tense accurately reflects that these research activities occurred at specific times in the past. When presenting your research question or hypothesis in the introduction, use present tense if you're stating current intentions, or future tense if you're stating future intentions. You're describing what you will do. This study examines the relationship between social media use and academic performance, uses present tense for current research focus, while this study will examine the relationship between social media use and academic performance, uses future tense for planned activities. The method section consistently uses past tense because you're describing completed research activities. Everything in the method section happened before you wrote your paper, so past tense accurately reflects the temporal relationship. Participants completed online surveys. Data collection occurred over 6 weeks, and the researcher administered assessments in controlled environments. All use past tense appropriately. Be particularly careful with method section verb tense because it's easy to slip into present tense when describing procedures. Avoid statements like participants complete surveys or the study uses a longitudinal design. These present tense constructions incorrectly suggest that the activities are ongoing rather than completed. The results section also uses past tense consistently because you're reporting findings from completed analyses. The analysis revealed significant differences. Participants showed improved performance, and statistical tests indicated strong correlations. All use past tense to reflect that these findings emerged from completed research activities. However, when referring to tables and figures in your results section, you may use present tense because these visual elements exist in the current document. Table 1 shows participant demographics, or Figure 2 illustrates the relationship between variables. Use present tense appropriately because readers are looking at these elements as they read your paper. The discussion section requires the most sophisticated verb tense usage because you're connecting your past findings to current knowledge and future implications. Use past tense when referring to your specific findings. This study found that social media use correlated with decreased academic performance. Use present tense when discussing current implications or established knowledge. These findings suggest that social media use affects student learning, or current evidence indicates that intervention programs can improve academic outcomes. When discussing limitations in your discussion section, use past tense for specific limitations of your completed study and present tense for ongoing limitations in the field. This study was limited by its small sample size, refers to your specific research, while current research lacks longitudinal data on social media. Effects refers to ongoing field limitations. Literature review sections, whether standalone papers or parts of larger works, typically use past tense when describing specific studies and present tense when describing general concepts, tense when discussing current knowledge or ongoing debates. This pattern helps readers distinguish between particular research findings and general field knowledge. The key principle underlying all these verb tense guidelines is temporal accuracy. Your verb tenses should accurately reflect when things happen, when they're happening, and when they will happen. This accuracy helps readers understand the temporal relationships in your research and positions your work appropriately within the scholarly timeline. Active versus passive voice, strategic applications. The choice between active and passive voice in academic writing should be strategic rather than automatic. While many writing guides advocate for active voice in all contexts, scholarly writing benefits from understanding when each voice serves your communication goals most effectively. Active voice creates direct, energetic sentences where the subject performs the action. Researchers conducted the study, students completed surveys, and the analysis revealed significant findings. All use active voice to create clear, straightforward communication. Active voice typically requires fewer words and creates more engaging prose that holds readers' attention effectively. Use active voice when you want to emphasize who performed actions, when you want to create energetic and engaging prose, and when you want to take clear responsibility for claims or procedures. Active voice works particularly well in method sections when describing your research procedures, and in discussion sections when presenting your interpretations and conclusions. Passive voice shifts emphasis from the actor to the action or recipient of action. The study was conducted over 6 months. Surveys were completed by participants, and significant findings were revealed through analysis. All use passive voice to focus attention on what happened rather than who did it. Passive voice serves important functions in academic writing. Use passive voice when the actor is unknown, unimportant, or obvious from context. In many research contexts, the specific identity of who performed routine procedures is less important than what procedures were followed. Data were collected using standardized instruments, focuses appropriately on the procedures rather than the personnel. Passive voice also helps maintain objectivity in scientific writing by reducing emphasis on individual researchers and increasing emphasis on methods and findings. This objectivity can enhance credibility in research reporting, particularly when describing standardized procedures or widely accepted methods. However, avoid passive voice when it creates ambiguity about responsibility or when it makes sentences unnecessarily wordy or unclear. Don't use passive voice simply to avoid first-person pronouns if active voice would be clearer and more direct. The key is strategic choice based on your communication goals. Consider what you want to emphasize in each sentence and choose the voice that best serves that emphasis. Sometimes this means mixing active and passive voice within the same paragraph or even the same sentence when different elements deserve different emphasis. For example, consider this strategic combination. We designed the study to examine social media effects, and data were collected using validated instruments. This combination of active and passive voice uses each voice where it's most effective. Modern APA style encourages judicious use of first-person pronouns when they create clearer, more direct communication. Don't contort your sentences into awkward passive constructions simply to avoid saying I or we. If you designed the study, conducted the analysis, or developed the interpretation, it's appropriate to say so directly using active voice and first-person pronouns. However, maintain professional tone even when using first-person pronouns. Focus on your research activities and scholarly contributions rather than personal opinions or feelings. Statements like, "We hypothesized that social media use would correlate with academic performance," are appropriate, while statements such as, "I think or not social media is probably bad for students," is too informal and imprecise for academic writing. Pronoun usage and inclusive language. Contemporary academic writing requires sensitivity to diverse identities and communities, reflected in thoughtful pronoun usage and inclusive language practices. These guidelines ensure your writing communicates respectfully while meeting current professional standards for scholarly discourse. The singular they has become standard in academic writing for referring to individuals whose gender is unknown, irrelevant, or non-binary. This usage reflects both linguistic evolution and respect for diverse gender identities. Instead of the awkward he or she construction, use they naturally. When a student completes their assignment, they should submit it through the online portal. This singular they usage follows the same grammatical patterns as plural they, taking plural verb forms even when referring to a single person. The participant completed their survey uses singular they appropriately with the plural possessive form their. When writing about specific individuals, use the pronouns they prefer. If you're unsure about someone's pronouns, use their name or ask respectfully. In research contexts, consider asking participants about their preferred pronouns as part of demographic data collection, recognizing that this information helps you write about your research respectfully and accurately. Avoid gendered assumptions in your language choices. Instead of chairman, use chairperson or chair. Instead of mankind, use humanity or people. Instead of man-made, use artificial or synthetic. These alternatives communicate the same meanings while including all people in your language. Be particularly careful with occupational terms that have historically carried gender assumptions. Use police officer instead of policeman, firefighter instead of fireman, and flight attendant instead of stewardess. These terms accurately describe the roles without unnecessary gender specifications. When discussing research participants or populations, use language that respects their identities and experiences. Put people first in your language. Use people with disabilities rather than disabled people, students experiencing homelessness rather than homeless students, and individuals with autism rather than autistic individuals. However, recognize that language preferences vary among communities and individuals. Some disability communities prefer identity-first language, autistic people, while others prefer person-first language, people with autism. When possible, follow the preferences expressed by the communities you're writing about. Use specific, accurate terms for racial and ethnic groups, capitalizing these designations appropriately. Write African American, Latino, Asian American, Native American, and white with proper capitalization. Avoid outdated or imprecise terms, and be specific when possible, Mexican American or Korean American rather than the broader Hispanic or Asian when specificity serves your research purposes. Age-related language should be respectful and specific. Use older adults rather than elderly or seniors, and younger adults rather than kids in formal academic contexts. Specify age ranges when relevant to your research. Adults age 65 to 80 provides more useful information than general age categories. Sexual orientation and gender identity terminology evolves rapidly, so stay current with preferred language in these areas. Use sexual orientation rather than sexual preference. Recognize that LGBTQ+ encompasses diverse identities, and avoid assumptions about relationships or family structures. Economic language should avoid stigmatizing terms. Use low income rather than poor, economically disadvantaged rather than underprivileged, and specific descriptors rather than vague generalizations when discussing socioeconomic factors in research. The goal of inclusive language is not political correctness, but accurate, respectful communication that includes all people in scholarly discourse. Inclusive language often provides more precise communication than traditional alternatives, while demonstrating your awareness of diverse communities and contemporary professional standards. Stay informed about evolving language practices in your field and in the communities you study or serve. Language preferences change over time, and what's considered respectful in this era might differ from what was standard in previous decades. Professional organizations, style guides, and community advocacy groups provide current guidance on respectful language practices, bias-free language principles, Bias-free language in academic writing reflects fundamental principles of scholarly inquiry, accuracy, respect, and inclusion. These principles ensure that your writing contributes to knowledge creation while honoring the dignity and diversity of all people who participate in or are affected by research. The foundation of bias-free language is accuracy in description and attribution. Describe people and groups using the terms they prefer for themselves when possible, and avoid language that reflects assumptions rather than evidence. Instead of writing normal families, when you mean two-parent families, use the specific descriptive term that accurately reflects your meaning, without implying that other family structures are abnormal. Avoid language that presents one group as the standard against which others are measured. Instead of non-white participants, specify the actual racial or ethnic identities of your participants. Instead of non-traditional students, describe the specific characteristics you're discussing, such as students over age 25 or part-time students. Be cautious with comparative language that might inadvertently create hierarchies or value judgments. Instead of higher functioning and lower functioning individuals, describe specific abilities or characteristics relevant to your research. Instead of normal and abnormal development, use specific descriptors like typical and atypical, or describe particular developmental patterns. Avoid essentializing language that treats complex human characteristics as fixed or defining. Instead of diabetics, use people with diabetes. Instead of the elderly, use older adults. This person-first language recognizes that medical conditions, age, or other characteristics are aspects of people's lives rather than their defining features. However, respect community preferences when they differ from general person-first guidelines. Some communities prefer identity-first language that embraces particular characteristics as central to their identities. The deaf community often prefers deaf people to people with hearing loss, and many autistic individuals prefer autistic people to people with autism. Use parallel language when discussing different groups. If you refer to one group by a specific characteristic, use similar specificity for comparison groups. Instead of women and minorities, use women and men from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, or specify the particular groups you're discussing. Avoid language that pathologizes difference or implies deficiency. Instead of suffers from or victim of, use neutral descriptors like has or experiences. Instead of confined to a wheelchair, uses a wheelchair. These changes reflect understanding that many conditions or characteristics are not inherently negative experiences. Be specific about the populations you're discussing rather than using broad generalizations. Instead of Hispanics prefer, specify which Latino communities you're discussing and avoid overgeneralizing from limited data. Different communities within broad categories may have very different experiences, preferences, and characteristics. Question assumptions embedded in traditional academic language. Terms like developing countries, primitive cultures, or broken families carry value judgments that may not reflect the perspectives of the people being described. Consider whether more neutral, descriptive language would communicate your meaning more accurately and respectfully. Recognize that bias-free language serves scholarly accuracy as well as social justice. When your language accurately reflects the diversity and complexity of human experience, your research findings and interpretations are more likely to be accurate and useful. Biased language can lead to biased thinking, which can compromise the quality of your scholarly work. Stay informed about evolving understanding of bias in academic language. What seemed neutral or appropriate in previous decades might now be recognized as carrying implicit biases. Professional development in this area is ongoing for all scholars, and willingness to learn and adapt demonstrates commitment to scholarly excellence. Remember that bias-free language is not about avoiding offense, but about achieving accuracy, respect, and inclusion in scholarly communication. These goals align with the fundamental values of academic inquiry and contribute to research that serves diverse communities effectively. Modern academic language standards. Modern academic language standards reflect the evolution of scholarly communication in an increasingly diverse and interconnected world. Understanding these contemporary standards ensures your writing meets current professional expectations while contributing to inclusive scholarly discourse. Contemporary academic writing embraces clarity and accessibility without sacrificing intellectual rigor. This means choosing language that communicates complex ideas clearly rather than using unnecessarily complex vocabulary to appear scholarly. Your goal is effective communication with diverse audiences, not demonstration of vocabulary knowledge. Modern standards encourage strategic use of first-person pronouns when they enhance clarity and directness. Instead of contorting sentences to avoid I or we, use these pronouns naturally when discussing your research activities, interpretations, or conclusions. We hypothesize that social media use would affect academic performance is clearer and more direct than it was hypothesized that social media use would affect academic performance. However, maintain professional focus even when using first-person pronouns. Discuss your scholarly activities and evidence-based conclusions rather than personal opinions or feelings. The goal is clear communication about your research, not personal narrative. Contemporary academic writing also recognizes the global nature of scholarly communication. Avoid idioms, cultural references, or colloquialisms that might not translate across cultural contexts. Choose language that communicates effectively to international audiences while maintaining appropriate academic tone. Digital communication has influenced academic writing standards, encouraging more direct and accessible prose. However, maintain the precision and evidence-based reasoning that characterize scholarly discourse. The goal is accessible academic writing, not casual communication. Stay current with evolving standards in your field through professional organizations, style guides, and scholarly publications. Language standards continue to evolve as our understanding of effective and inclusive communication develops. Integration and quality control. The grammar, usage, and language guidelines we've covered work together to create scholarly writing that is precise, respectful, and professionally competent. Integrating these elements requires systematic attention during both drafting and revision processes. Develop a revision checklist that addresses verb, tense consistency, pronoun usage, inclusive language, and bias-free communication. Review your drafts specifically for these elements. Separate from content and organization reviews. This systematic approach ensures that language precision supports rather than distracts from your scholarly contributions. Consider your audience and purpose when making language choices. Academic writing for diverse international audiences might require different language strategies than writing for specialized disciplinary communities. However, inclusive and respectful language serves all audiences effectively. Remember that language precision and inclusivity support scholarly accuracy. When your language accurately reflects the complexity and diversity of human experience, your research findings and interpretations are more likely to be accurate and useful. Practice these language skills consistently across all your academic writing. Professional language habits develop through repeated application and become natural parts of your scholarly communication repertoire. Conclusion and transition. Excellent work mastering the grammar, usage, and language guidelines that ensure your academic writing meets contemporary professional standards. You now understand strategic verb tense usage, inclusive pronoun practices, bias-free language principles, and modern academic communication standards. In Lecture 6, we'll focus on the mechanical precision that supports your grammatical and stylistic excellence, punctuation, capitalization, and style details that demonstrate professional competence and attention to scholarly standards. The language skills you've developed in this lecture will serve you throughout your academic career and into your professional life. They reflect not only technical competence, but also your commitment to respectful, inclusive scholarly communication that serves diverse communities effectively. Thank you for joining me for Lecture 5.